In the summer of 1942, the German army stood at the edge of victory. France had fallen. Western Europe was under Nazi control, and in the East, Hitler believed the Soviet Union was already dying. All that remained was one city, a city stretched thin along the Volga River, factories smoking, apartment blocks crumbling, a name that carried more weight than steel, Stalingrad, not because of what it produced, not because of where it stood on the map, but because of what it symbolized. It carried Stalin's name, and Hitler wanted it erased. To the German High Command, Stalingrad was supposed to be simple: capture the city, cut Soviet supply lines along the Volga, secure the oil fields of the Caucasus, then end the war in the East. But war does not care about plans. By August, the Luftwaffe arrived first. They did not aim for precision. They aimed for annihilation. Bombs fell day and night. Wooden homes burned instantly. Stone buildings collapsed into themselves. Hospitals, schools, families, all swallowed by fire. Within weeks, Stalingrad was no longer a city. It was rubble. And yet, people were still there. Women, children, factory workers who slept beside machines and returned to work between air raids. Some civilians fled across the Volga under fire. Many didn't make it. Those who stayed would soon understand something terrifying. There would be no evacuation. Stalin had given his order. Not one step back. Retreat was treason, surrender was unthinkable, and survival was optional. As German infantry approached the ruins, they expected a broken enemy. Instead, they found men who had nowhere left to run. Soviet soldiers hid inside collapsed walls, basements, sewer tunnels. Every room became a battlefield, every staircase a killing zone. The Germans had a name for it: Rattenkrieg, Rat War, a fight fought meter by meter, knife by knife, breath by breath. By autumn, the Volga froze. Supplies ran thin, the dead were stacked like sandbags, and still, the city did not fall. Because Stalingrad was no longer just a place, it had become a decision. And soon, that decision would cost over 2 million lives. By September 1942, Stalingrad should have fallen. On paper, the German Sixth Army had done everything right. They had pushed hundreds of miles into Soviet territory. They had broken resistance across the steppe. They had reached the Volga. But the city still stood, and Hitler could not accept that. Originally, Stalingrad was not the main objective. The oil fields of the Caucasus were. Fuel was the lifeblood of the German war machine. Without it, tanks stopped. Planes stayed grounded. But as the fighting dragged on, the city's name began to matter more than its value. Hitler split his forces. One army south for oil, another east for a symbol. That decision would fracture the German advance. Inside Stalingrad, civilians paid first. The bombings had destroyed food stores, water pipes were shattered, electricity vanished. Families lived underground in cellars filled with dust and smoke. Children learned to sleep through artillery. Some scavenged corpses for clothing. Others boiled wallpaper paste just to feel full. There were no safe zones, only degrees of danger. German infantry moved deeper into the ruins. They captured factories, then lost them by nightfall. The Red October factory changed hands dozens of times. So did the tractor factory, sometimes within the same day. Soldiers fought so close they could hear each other breathing. Grenades were rolled down stairwells. Flamethrowers were used to flush men from basements. The dead were not buried. They froze where they fell. The German army had trained for speed, for movement, for decisive strikes. Stalingrad gave them none of that. Instead, it consumed time, and time was the one thing Germany could not afford. As weeks passed, Soviet command adapted. They stopped retreating in lines. They fought in fragments, small groups, snipers, night raids. Every German advance triggered a counterattack. Every gain cost blood. And behind the front lines, something else was happening. Soviet reserves were building, quietly, patiently. While Germany poured men into the city, the Red Army gathered strength beyond it. They were not trying to save Stalingrad. They were preparing to trap it. By November, winter arrived. German soldiers lacked proper winter gear. Fuel shortages worsened. Supply lines stretched thin across open plains, guarded by weaker Allied troops. Romanian units held the flanks, under-equipped, outnumbered, waiting. Stalingrad had done what no battlefield before it had managed. It slowed the German war machine to a crawl, and the Soviet Union was about to strike back. The trap was already closing. By October 1942, the battle for Stalingrad had become something else entirely. It was no longer about lines on a map. It was about who could endure longer. The ruins created perfect killing grounds, collapsed walls, broken windows, twisted steel. Every shadow could hide a rifle. Every movement invited death. The Soviets understood this. They trained men to disappear into the rubble. Snipers were no longer lone hunters. They worked in pairs, spotter and shooter. They studied light, wind, sound. Sometimes they waited hours for one shot. One name would later become famous, Vasily Zaitsev. But during the battle, he was not a symbol. He was a problem. German soldiers began to fear crossing open spaces. Officers stopped standing upright. Helmets appeared on sticks first, then men followed, cautiously. Sniping was not just killing, it was control. A sniper didn't need to fire. The possibility was enough. Men froze in doorways, delayed attacks, abandoned positions. Fear spread faster than bullets. The Germans responded with their own snipers. They hunted the hunters. Duels formed across shattered streets. Days-long contests of patience and nerves. Sometimes neither man fired. Sometimes both died. Civilians were still there, hiding beneath floors, waiting for darkness to move. A woman fetching water could be shot by either side. A child crossing rubble might never reach the other side. No one was safe, not even the unseen. For soldiers, the strain became unbearable. Sleep came in fragments. Every sound triggered panic. Men hallucinated footsteps, voices. Some fired at shadows, others refused to move at all. Bodies remained where they fell. The ground absorbed blood and froze solid. Rats grew bold. They fed without fear. Stalingrad stripped war of any illusion. There was no charge, no glory, only waiting, watching, surviving the next minute. And while the city consumed men one by one, the Soviet command watched carefully. They let the Germans sink deeper. They let them commit everything. Because the sniper war was never meant to win Stalingrad. It was meant to hold it long enough for something much larger to begin. The counter-offensive was coming. By November 1942, the Germans believed Stalingrad was almost theirs. They were wrong. While the fighting inside the city consumed attention, the Soviet High Command had been planning something far larger, not inside the ruins, but around them. The German Sixth Army was strong in the city, but its flanks were not. They were held by Allied forces, Romanian, Italian, Hungarian troops, poorly equipped, thinly spread, outgunned. On the morning of November 19th, the Soviet counteroffensive began. Operation Uranus. Artillery opened the skies. Thousands of guns fired at once. The ground shook. Snow lifted into the air. Communication lines vanished in seconds. Soviet armor followed, not toward Stalingrad, but past it. They punched through the weak flanks. Tank after tank, wave after wave, resistance collapsed almost immediately. German commanders struggled to understand. Reports contradicted each other. Maps became useless. What was happening wasn't a breakthrough, it was an encirclement. Within days, Soviet forces met west of Stalingrad. The ring closed. Over 250,000 Axis troops were trapped inside the city. For the first time, the hunters were surrounded. Inside the pocket, panic spread. Fuel ran low. Ammunition dwindled. Food was rationed to nothing. Winter tightened its grip. German generals pleaded to break out. They still had tanks, still had men. But the order from Berlin was clear. Hold, do not retreat. Hitler promised supplies by air. The Luftwaffe could not deliver even a fraction of what was needed. Planes froze, airfields were shelled, pilots died landing under fire. The reality set in slowly. Then all at once, Stalingrad was no longer a battle. It was a sealed grave. The Soviet forces waited. They did not rush. They tightened the ring, day by day. And inside, the city began to starve. Pause. What followed was not combat. It was collapse. By January 1943, Stalingrad was silent in a new way, not from peace, from exhaustion. Temperatures dropped below -30. Men burned furniture, books, doors, anything to stay alive. Rations shrank to crumbs. Horse meat disappeared. Then dogs. Then rats. Wounded soldiers froze where they lay. Medical supplies were gone. Amputations were done without anesthesia. Some men begged not to be treated. They knew survival was unlikely. The Luftwaffe airlift had failed. Completely. Planes arrived with hope. They left with the wounded, if they left at all. Many never took off again. Disease spread rapidly. Typhus, dysentery. Men who had survived months of combat now died quietly in cellars. Soviet artillery resumed, not to break resistance, but to remind them there would be no relief. On January 31st, 1943, Field Marshal Friedrich Paulus surrendered the southern pocket. 2 days later, the northern group followed. It was the first time in German history that an entire field army surrendered. 90,000 men marched into captivity. Most were wounded, frostbitten, starving. Only a fraction would ever return home. Stalingrad was over. The cost was unimaginable. Over 2 million casualties combined, soldiers, civilians, entire families erased. But strategically, the war had changed forever. Germany had lost its momentum. The myth of invincibility was broken. From Stalingrad onward, the Red Army would advance west, relentlessly. The city itself was rubble. No streets, no buildings, just memory. Stalingrad did not end the war. But it ended something more important, the belief that Nazi Germany could still win it.